We heard someone crying in the woods. We heard someone crying in the woods, but the voice kept shifting. At first it sounded like a child, thin, reedy sobs breaking unevenly, drifting through the trees beyond our campsite. The sound moved strangely, not carried so much as placed, as if the forest were setting it down gently between trunks and shadows. Eli froze with a bundle of firewood in his arms. I felt the cold immediately, not just in the air but under my skin, a damp chill that seeped through my jacket and into my ribs. "Did you hear that?" he asked, already knowing the answer. The fog had rolled in just after sunset, thick and low, clinging to the forest floor like breath held too long. It swallowed the edges of our clearing, blurring the trees into vertical smears. Sound behaved differently in it, muted, delayed, bent. When I answered Eli, my own voice sounded distant, as though it had traveled farther than the few feet between us. "Yeah," I said. It sounded close. The crying stopped. We stood there, listening to the fire crackle and the soft drip of condensation from the leaves above. The silence pressed in, heavy and expectant. Then the sound returned, closer this time, but lower, older. The pitch slid downward into something strained and adult. The sobs uneven, almost practiced. "Help," the voice said, and for a moment it sounded exactly like me. Eli dropped the firewood. The sound of it hitting the ground came twice, once sharp and immediate, once dull and late, echoing from somewhere deeper in the trees. I turned slowly, my pulse loud in my ears. The fog shifted as I moved, curling inward, thickening, and for just a second I thought I saw a shape standing at the edge of the clearing. It held its form too long to be missed, too soft to be solid. "Okay," Eli said quietly. "That's not normal." We tried to rationalize it, whined through Hollow's animals, exhaustion, but the forest resisted explanation. The fog reacted when we shifted our weight, rolling toward us in slow, deliberate waves. Shapes formed in it, humanoid silhouettes that lingered a heartbeat longer than they should have, then dissolved when directly observed. One leaned when Eli leaned. Another raised an arm when I did, delayed by just enough to feel intentional. The crying came again, this time fractured, half child, half adult, the tones overlapping like badly synced audio. It moved in a way that didn't match distance, sometimes sounding right behind us, sometimes impossibly far away. When Eli called out, the forest answered with his own voice, softened and warped, repeating his words with a different cadence. That night, sleep came in fragments. I dreamed of walking through fog so dense it felt solid, of voices calling my name from every direction, each one slightly wrong. I woke with no memory of falling asleep. The fire burned low, and Eli sitting upright, staring into the trees. "It said my name," he whispered. The next morning felt out of order. Sunlight filtered weakly through the fog, bending and refracting until the forest looked doubled, layered. I found my boots outside the tent, muddy, though I didn't remember leaving. Eli insisted he'd heard me walk away during the night, following the crying. I had no memory of it. When I tried to recall the hours after midnight, my thoughts slid away, replaced by the image of fog closing in. The voice returned mid-morning, softer now, curious. It cried again, but the pitch kept shifting, child to adult to something stretched and hollow. Sometimes it sounded like Eli, sometimes like a stranger, and once, unmistakably, like the thoughts forming in my own head just before I spoke them aloud. The fog thickened as the sound drew nearer. It flowed between the trees with purpose, forming figures that stood where the voice paused, as if marking its path. When Eli stepped forward, the fog parted for him. When he hesitated, it pressed closer to his legs, urging. "I think it wants us to follow," he said. "No," I said too quickly. "It wants you to." He looked at me then, really looked, as if measuring the distance between my words and my fear. The crying shifted again, now steady, almost calm. It sounded like relief. Eli grabbed a flashlight and started toward the trees. I followed at first, then slowed. The forest changed the deeper we went. Reflections in puddles didn't match our movements, lagging behind or tilting their heads independently. The crying grew clearer, more precise, no longer calling out loud but threading itself through thought, aligning with intention. I realized with a jolt that I hadn't heard it for several minutes. Not audibly. It was inside the pauses between my thoughts. Eli stopped. "I know where it is," he said, voice flat. The fog ahead condensed into a shape, humanoid, tall, its edges soft but defined. It mirrored Eli's posture perfectly, down to the slight hunch of his shoulders. When he took a step forward, it did the same, anticipation written into its stillness. "I think," Eli said slowly, "it's been listening longer than we have." The crying stopped entirely. In the silence, the forest felt alert, watching. The fog pulsed faintly, responding not to movement now, but to thought. I knew, without hearing it, that the voice didn't need sound anymore. It had learned rhythm, intention, the shape of wanting. Eli stepped closer to the figure. I don't remember him leaving me behind. I only remember standing alone later, fog curling at my feet, the forest impossibly quiet. When I turned back toward the campsite, the path was gone, replaced by trees I didn't recognize. Somewhere deep in the woods, someone began to cry again. This time it sounded exactly like me. A creature followed us, changing shape every time we blinked. The first time I noticed it, I thought it was a trick of the fog. The forest trail had narrowed into something more like a suggestion than a path, and the mist clung low to the ground, pooling between roots and fallen leaves. It was late afternoon, but the light filtered down in warped, fractured beams, bending through the fog so everything looked slightly out of alignment. Owen walked ahead of me, his pack creaking softly, each step muffled as if the ground itself were trying to absorb sound. I blinked to clear the sting from my eyes, and there it was, behind us, far enough back to be indistinct, close enough that I felt its presence before I truly saw it. A tall, thin silhouette, vaguely humanoid, its edges blurred as though unfinished. When I blinked again, it was gone. "Did you see that?" I asked. Owen stopped. The sound of his boots crunching gravel echoed once. Then again, delayed, as if the forest needed a moment to decide whether to repeat it. He turned slowly. "See what?" I didn't answer right away. The fog shifted in front of me, reacting to my hesitation, coiling tighter around the trees. When I blinked again, the shape returned, but it had changed. Now it was lower to the ground, longer, its spine arched like an animal midstalk. Too many joints, too smooth. I swallowed. "Something's back there." Owen followed my gaze. The creature did not vanish when he looked, only softened, its outlines smearing into abstraction, as if it hadn't finished deciding what it was supposed to be. Then Owen blinked, changed again. This time it was wrong in a different way. A suggestion of antlers, a torso that folded inward, limbs bending at angles that made my stomach tighten. The transformation lagged by a fraction of a second, like bad synchronization. I realized then it wasn't instantaneous. It was watching us blink, timing itself to us. "Okay," Owen said quietly. "That's not fog." We backed away slowly. The forest responded. The trail behind us seemed to stretch, the trees subtly rearranging their spacing. Sounds grew unreliable. Our breathing sounded too loud, then too far away. A bird call echoed before the bird took flight. When I turned my head, the fog parted first, as if anticipating the motion. The creature followed. Every blink changed it. Sometimes it looked almost human, head tilted, shoulders sloped in an echo of Owen's posture. Sometimes it became something feral, all muscle and intent. Once, it flattened into a shape I couldn't categorize at all, like a moving shadow that had forgotten it was supposed to be attached to anything. And each time it was closer. We tried not blinking. Our eyes burned, watered. The creature held its form longer when we did that, as though pleased, as though it preferred consistency. When I finally blinked again, the delay in its transformation stretched, just enough for me to see it thinking before it changed. "Does it feel like..." I started, then trailed off. "Like it knows where we're going?" Owen finished. The forest grew denser as we moved. Fog pressed against our legs, against our thoughts. I became aware of gaps, small at first. A missing step. A stretch of trail I didn't remember walking. At one point I looked down and realized my hands were muddy, though I couldn't recall touching the ground. We reached a clearing we hadn't planned for. It sat like a wound in the forest, perfectly circular. The fog thinner at its center and thicker around the edges, as if the mist itself were reluctant to cross an invisible boundary. In the middle stood a cluster of stones half sunk into the soil, arranged in a rough spiral. The air here felt heavier, charged, humming just below hearing. The creature stopped at the treeline. It didn't cross into the clearing right away. Instead, it shifted again, this time into something disturbingly familiar. It mirrored Owen's stance exactly, down to the angle of his head. When Owen raised his flashlight, the creature's outline flared faintly, as though responding to the idea of light rather than the beam itself. "That's not copying," Owen whispered. "It's anticipating." I felt it then, the sensation of being guided. The trail hadn't led us here by accident. Every bend, every sound distortion, every moment of hesitation, it had all nudged us toward this place. The forest wasn't just watching. It was participating. The creature stepped into the clearing. When it did, the fog around us surged, reacting sharply, almost eagerly. The shape faltered, shimmered, then reformed, not as Owen, not as an animal, but as something in between. A framework of intention rather than flesh. It looked at us, and I understood with sudden, icy clarity that it was no longer limited to sight. It knew what we were about to do. Owen took a step back. The creature shifted before he finished moving. "Don't," I said, though I wasn't sure what I meant. Owen turned to me, eyes wide. "It's not learning how we move," he said. "It's learning why." The stones in the center of the clearing seemed closer than they had been a moment ago. Or maybe time was folding again. I couldn't tell how long we'd been standing there. My thoughts felt slower, heavier, as though something were reading them as they formed. The creature tilted its head. Not in imitation, in recognition. Owen ran. The sound of his footsteps fractured, echoing in the wrong directions. I tried to follow, but the fog thickened instantly, reshaping the space between us. I blinked, and the creature was no longer in the clearing. It was ahead of him, not blocking the path, guiding it. I don't remember screaming. I don't remember stopping. The next clear memory I have is standing alone at the edge of the forest hours later. The fog thinning, the trees returning to something almost normal. My phone said I'd been hiking for 3 days. Owen was never found. Sometimes, when I close my eyes too long, I see something shifting behind my thoughts, testing shapes, practicing intentions. And I understand now that the creature was never following us. It was being led by the forest, and it learned exactly what it needed from us.